Padre Pio looked at the man across the confessional and said, "Your daughter did not die alone." The man had come to confess something else entirely. He had prepared his words on the long journey from Foggia. He had arranged the ordinary catalogue of his failures, the impatience, the pride, the prayers neglected, the small dishonesties of a busy man. He had been very careful not to mention the thing he could not yet bring himself to name. Padre Pio did not need him to mention it. "She called for you in the last hours," Padre Pio said. "I saw the moment. I see many moments from the confessional, moments that are brought to me by souls before they are brought to me by the people who lived them. Your daughter arrived before you did. She wanted me to tell you something, but first I need to tell you what I saw inside your soul on the morning you chose to leave." The man's name was Cesare Martinelli. He was 44 years old, a factory owner from Foggia, and his daughter Maria had been 9 years old when she died of pneumonia on a Tuesday afternoon in March of 1957, while he was in Bari sitting across a table from a creditor who had defaulted on a contract worth 200,000 lire. His wife Giovanna had been at the hospital. His son Rinaldo, 14, had been at the hospital. Maria's parish priest had been at the hospital. Everyone who loved her had been at the hospital. Cesare Martinelli had been in Bari. I've seen it with my own eyes. In 20 years walking into homes as a health visitor in Coventry, I was occasionally present in the aftermath of something like what Cesare had carried. The grief that follows an ordinary death is shaped in a particular way. It is heavy, and it is slow, and it is vast, but it has a quality of, there is no better word for it, cleanliness. You loved someone. They died. You grieve. The grief is proportionate to what was lost. The grief that follows an absence is different. It has something sharp at the center of it, a hook that the ordinary grief does not have, a hook that catches on everything, that makes the grieving person circle back repeatedly to a specific moment, a specific choice, a specific fork in the road where something was decided and then could not be undecided. I recognized that grief in certain homes before the families had told me anything specific about their circumstances. Something in how they moved, something in the quality of the silence when certain subjects were approached. The grief was real and it was profound, but underneath it was something else that had not yet been named and could not be healed until it was. Cesare Martinelli was living inside that grief the day he arrived at San Giovanni Rotondo, 3 months after Maria's death. Let me tell you who he was before any of this, because Cesare Martinelli was not a cold man. He was not a man who did not love his children. I want to be precise about this, because the easiest thing in the world is to hear a story about a father who chose work over a dying child and to decide that you already understand the kind of man he was. Padre Pio did not make that decision, and neither should we. Cesare was the third of 5 children born to a tenant farmer named Giustino Martinelli, who had worked a plot of land near Cerignola for 30 years before dying suddenly of a cardiac event in the autumn of 1921, when Cesare was 8 years old. The family had no land of their own, no savings, no pension. Giustino's death meant immediate destitution. Within months, the family was surviving on what the older children could earn through day labor and what neighbors brought to the door. Cesare's mother, a woman named Vincenza, held the household together with a combination of ferocious practicality and deep Catholic faith that Cesare admired and never fully understood. He understood the practicality immediately. The faith took longer because what Cesare had concluded at 8 years old, kneeling beside his father's body on the floor of their farmhouse, was that the world was not safe, that it could remove everything you depended on in a single afternoon, that the only reliable protection against that removal was what you could produce and accumulate and control with your own hands. Not prayer, not faith, not the goodwill of neighbors. Work, only work. He had spent the next 36 years building on that conclusion. He had worked his way from day laborer to apprentice to skilled metal worker to foreman to part owner to full owner of a factory that employed 23 men and produced iron fittings for the construction industry across the province of Foggia. He was respected. He was considered fair. He was the kind of employer who paid on time and remembered workers' names and their children's names. He was genuinely proud of what he had built, and he had every reason to be. He had also been a good father in all the ways that did not require him to be present when he felt powerless. He attended every school event that did not conflict with work. He brought gifts. He told Giovanna regularly and sincerely that the factory was for them, for the family, for the future, for the security that his own childhood had been denied. He believed this completely. He was not lying. But Giovanna had noticed, over 20 years of marriage, that the factory was also the place where Cesare was never helpless. The one domain in which he was fully in control, fully competent, fully protected from the thing that had been waiting inside him since the afternoon his father died. Maria had been sick for 5 days before the crisis. Pneumonia moved differently in 1957 than it moves today. Antibiotics were available, but not always effective. And in a child with a compromised immune system, the progression could be rapid and unpredictable. The hospital doctor had told Giovanna on the 4th day that Maria had turned a corner and was improving. On the 5th day, the morning of the crisis, the improvement had proved illusory. That morning, Cesare had received a telephone call from his business partner, Aldo Ferraro, the main iron supplier for the factory, a firm in Taranto with whom they had a long-standing contract, had gone into receivership the previous afternoon. 200,000 lire worth of prepaid raw materials was now in the hands of creditors. If Cesare did not travel to Bari within 24 hours to file a claim with the receiver, the money would be lost entirely. 200,000 lire. In 1957, in Foggia, that was the cost of keeping 23 men employed for 2 months. Giovanna asked him not to go. She said to him, clearly and directly, "The doctor does not know what will happen today. Maria is asking for you. Please do not leave today." Cesare heard her. He sat with the decision for perhaps 30 minutes, and then he told himself what men tell themselves in that moment, that Giovanna was frightened and therefore overstating the danger, that Maria had been improving yesterday and would continue to improve, that the doctors were there and the nurses were there and Giovanna was there and Maria was 9 years old and strong, and that he would be back in 2 days. That the responsible thing, the truly loving thing, the thing that protected the whole family, was to go to Bari and protect the livelihood that kept them all safe. He kissed Giovanna. He said goodbye to Maria, who was awake, and asked him where he was going, and he told her he had important work to do and that he would bring her something nice from Bari when he came back. She said, "Come back soon, Papa." He said, "I will come back soon." He left on the morning bus. Maria died the following afternoon at 4 o'clock. She had called for her father repeatedly in the last 2 hours. Giovanna had held her hand and told her that Papa was coming, that Papa loved her, that Papa would be there soon. The lie was made entirely from love and had not helped. Cesare received the telegram in Bari at 6 in the evening. He read it in the lobby of the hotel where he had spent the previous night. He did not cry. He sat in a chair in the lobby for a long time, and the hotel staff who saw him there could not tell afterward whether he was in shock or simply very still. He took the first bus back to Foggia the following morning. He arrived to find the house full of the particular silence that settles into a home after a child has been taken out of it, and Giovanna's face wearing an expression he had never seen before and could not fully interpret. He did not cry at the funeral either, not in front of the family, not in the small room afterward when most of the visitors had gone home. He was present in the way that a wall is present, standing between everyone and the worst of the weather, but not soft, not reachable, Rinaldo watched his father through the whole of that day and said nothing at all. He would say nothing to his father of any substance for the next 3 months. Within a week of the funeral, Cesare was at the factory for 14 hours a day. Hold on, because what Padre Pio told Cesare about that week, about what was happening inside the soul of a man who returns to work 7 days after his daughter's funeral, is something that changes how you understand the relationship between grief and spiritual absence. And it leads to the hidden connection at the center of this story. The thing that Padre Pio saw that Cesare had never once named in 44 years of living. He had recovered 2/3 of the money from the creditors in Bari, by the way, 138,000 lire out of 200,000. His partner Aldo had been pleased. Cesare had filed the paperwork and shaken the relevant hands and done everything he had gone to Bari to do. He had protected the factory. He had protected the livelihoods of 23 men. He had done exactly what he told himself he was going there to do, and his daughter had died, calling his name. 3 months after the funeral, Aldo Ferraro sat across from Cesare at the end of a long day and said something to him directly. He said, "You need to go to San Giovanni Rotondo." Cesare had not been to the friary since before the war. He started to object, the work, the schedule, the things that needed his attention. Aldo looked at him for a moment and then said, "Cesare, the factory will still be here. Go." He went the following week. When Padre Pio looked at him across the confessional and said, "Your daughter did not die alone," something in Cesare's chest went still and cold in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Padre Pio had known her name. He knew the day, the specific Tuesday afternoon. He knew that she had called for her father, and he said, very carefully, that he had seen the moment, not the moment of her death, the moment of your departure. "I saw your soul in that moment, and I want to tell you what I saw." Cesare said, "Tell me." Padre Pio described it this way. He saw a man whose soul had, at some point far earlier in his life, built a room with a locked door. The room contained one thing: the experience of helplessness, of being 8 years old and kneeling beside a father who would not get up, with nothing in the world left to stand between the family and the cold, and no action available to take, and no outcome that could be controlled. That room had been locked for 36 years, and Cesare had built the rest of his life as a structure around that locked room. A structure specifically designed to ensure that the room would never need to be opened again. The factory was not his livelihood. The factory was his guarantee that helplessness would never find him again. And when Maria was dying, when the pneumonia was doing what pneumonia does regardless of how many men you employ, or how many contracts you hold, or how much iron you have in the warehouse, Cesare had felt the locked door begin to rattle. Because in a hospital room with a child who was sick in ways no factory owner could address, he was 8 years old again, and there was nothing he could do, and the helplessness was the same helplessness it had always been, and he could not bear it. So he ran, not to Bari. He ran to the only place where helplessness could not find him, and he called it the responsible thing, and he believed that completely, because the mind that is fleeing helplessness does not know it is fleeing. It believes entirely that it is simply doing what needs to be done. This is the hidden connection that Padre Pio saw, the connection between an 8-year-old boy kneeling beside a dead father and a 44-year-old man catching a bus to Bari, between the original wound and the choice made 36 years later, between the locked room inside Cesare and the absence that had cost Maria the presence of her father in the last hours of her life. Padre Pio said, "You did not choose work over your daughter because you valued the factory more than her. You chose work over your daughter because the factory was the only place where you were not powerless. You fled from what you could not control. And the price of that flight was paid by a 9-year-old girl who loved you without conditions and needed you without conditions and called your name because you were her father. and she was dying, and that is what children do. Cesare sat in silence for a long moment. Then Padre Pio said, "But she did not die alone. I told you that at the beginning, and I want you to hold that now, because what I'm going to say next is the most important thing I will say, and I need you to be able to hear it. Let me tell you something most people don't realize about divine mercy. Most people understand mercy as the forgiveness of sins, the erasure of what was done. That is true, but it is only half of what mercy is. The other half, the half that most people never receive because they never come far enough to ask for it, is the restoration of what was lost. Not the pretending that it was not lost, the actual spiritual restoration of what the choice cost. Padre Pio told Cesare, "Your daughter forgave you before she died. I am not speculating about this. I am telling you what I know because I have seen her, and what I have seen is not a child waiting for an explanation. What I have seen is a child waiting for her father to come home to God, because she knows, with the clarity that comes to souls after death, that you are not yet home, that you are still running, that the locked room is still locked, and that until it is opened, you will not be able to rest, and neither will she, because she loves you still with the same love she had at 9 years old, and she cannot fully rest while the father she loves is still imprisoned in the armor he built when he was 8. This changed everything for me. When I first read an account of Cesare's testimony, I thought about my own husband, David, not because David had made the same choice he hadn't, but because I recognized the specific quality of armor that a person builds around a childhood wound. I recognized it because I had carried my own version of it for years. The particular way that competence becomes a substitute for presence, the way that doing becomes a refuge from being, the way you can be very busy, very useful, very necessary, and still be running from the same thing you were running from at 8 years old. I've seen it in my work. I've seen it in the men whose hands were always busy when their families needed them to simply be still. I've seen it in the women whose homes were always perfectly ordered while the relationships inside them grew quietly cold. The armor of usefulness is the most convincing armor there is, precisely because it is genuinely useful. The factory did employ 23 men. The money did matter. None of that was false. But a thing can be true and still be armor. A reason can be real and still be an escape. Padre Pio said to Cesare, "The factory is not the enemy. Work is not the enemy. What needs to die is not your ability to provide. What needs to die is the conviction that your value as a human being, as a husband, as a father, as a man before God, depends on your ability to control outcomes. Your father did not die because you failed him. You were 8 years old. There was nothing to be done. And Maria did not die because God abandoned her. She died because she was 9 years old and her lungs could not hold her here. Some things cannot be fixed. Some things cannot be controlled. And the man who spends his life running from that truth will always, in the end, run straight into it." He paused, and then he said what he had been waiting to say since Cesare had entered the confessional. "She wants you to stop running. She is very specific about this. She says, 'Papa, come home to God, not to the factory, not to the work, to God. Because I am with God, and I cannot come back to you, but you can come to where I am, not in death, in life.' By giving God the helplessness you have been refusing to give him for 36 years. Few Catholics know this, and I want to say it as clearly as I can. The prayer for someone you have failed does not require you to have been adequate. It does not require you to have been present when you should have been, or strong when you should have been, or anything other than what you were. It requires only one thing: honesty. The specific, named, unambiguous honesty of a person who says to God, 'Here is what happened. Here is what I chose. Here is what it cost. And here is the wound underneath the choice that I have been protecting since I was a child. I give you all of it. I cannot carry it anymore. I give you my helplessness.' That is the prayer that opens the locked room. Not the prayer of a good man who made one bad decision. The prayer of a man who finally stops running and turns around and faces what has been chasing him since he was 8 years old. Padre Pio gave Cesare 5 specific things to do. He was always specific. He understood that a man who had spent his life in concrete, practical action needed concrete, practical instruction, because that is how God meets each soul, through the language the soul already knows. First, name what you did specifically, to God and to Giovanna. Not "I was absent when Maria needed me." The exact words, "I left when my daughter was dying because I was afraid of being helpless. I ran to the one place where I could feel in control. I was wrong, and it cost her the presence of her father in her last hours." Those words said aloud, to God in prayer, and then to Giovanna in person. Second, sit in the memory of that Tuesday morning, the moment of departure. Return to it deliberately in prayer, with God consciously present in the room. Do not flee it. Do not rationalize it. Sit in it until it no longer requires you to leave. This was Padre Pio's specific instruction. Go back to the bus station in your imagination. Stand there with God beside you. Feel what you felt that morning. And this time, do not run. Third, open the locked room. Say to God, in your own words, but aloud, "I give you my helplessness. I give you the thing I have been refusing to give you since I was 8 years old. I give you my father's death. I give you my inability to protect my family from everything. I give you my need to control outcomes. I give you the armor. Take it. I do not want it anymore." Fourth, go to Giovanna. Sit down with her in a room where you will not be interrupted. Say, "I left when Maria was dying. I told myself it was for the family, and part of me still believes that. But I know now, I have known since Tuesday, that I also left because I was afraid of being helpless. I am sorry, not for being inadequate, because I am a man, and I am always inadequate in the face of what matters most. I am sorry for running. I am sorry she called for me, and I was not there." Fifth, say Maria's name in prayer every morning, not a long prayer, just her name, and then this, "I am coming home to God, Maria. I am coming where you are." Say it every morning until the day the armor falls. Cesare went home to Foggia on the evening of the day he had spoken with Padre Pio. He did not go to the factory. He went directly to the house on the Via del Corso, where he and Giovanna had lived for 20 years, and where Giovanna was sitting at the kitchen table in the particular silence that had settled over her since March. He sat down across from her. He did not preface what he was about to say with any explanation or qualification. He said, "Giovanna, I left when Maria was dying. I know now that part of the reason I left was that I was afraid. I was afraid of being helpless, and I was wrong to go. I am sorry." He had expected many things from Giovanna in response. He had expected anger, and there would have been anger, and it would have been just. He had expected the cold distance she had been maintaining for 3 months. He had perhaps even expected silence. He had not expected her to begin to weep. Not the small, controlled weeping of a woman maintaining her composure. The complete weeping of a woman whose grief had been waiting for permission to be fully expressed. As if Cesare's acknowledgement had released something she had been holding in place with enormous effort for 90 days. He wept too. For the first time since the telegram had arrived in the hotel lobby in Bari, Cesare Martinelli wept. Not quietly, not in a controlled and dignified way. The armor fell, and what was under it was simply a father who had not been there when his daughter called for him, and who was now in the kitchen at the Via del Corso at 8 o'clock in the evening, weeping in the presence of his wife, without anything between himself and that fact. Rinaldo, who was 14 years old and had said nothing of substance to his father in 3 months, came to the kitchen doorway. He saw his parents sitting at the kitchen table together, both of them weeping. He stood in the doorway for a moment, and then he came in. He sat down at the table without being asked. He did not say anything. He stayed until 10 o'clock that evening. He went to bed without saying good night. The next morning, he said good morning to his father, and then, as if it had been there all along, waiting to be said, he asked Cesare to pass the salt. It was the first ordinary sentence Rinaldo had spoken to his father since Maria died. The armor, once it falls in all directions at once. Cesare continued working at the factory. He did not renounce the work or the livelihood or the responsibility for his workers' families. He did not become a different kind of man in the ways that are visible from the outside. He was still precise and practical and organized. He was still the man who measured twice and cut once. But something fundamental had shifted in the place where the locked room had been. The room was open. And the thing that had been locked inside it for 36 years, the helplessness, the fear, the 8-year-old boy who had watched his father die and decided that control was the only protection, was no longer locked inside it because he had given it to God in a friary confessional in San Giovanni Rotondo on a Tuesday afternoon in June of 1957. He put a photograph of Maria on his desk at the factory. A school photograph from the year before she died. A solemn, bright-eyed girl who looked directly at the camera with the same quality of precision her father had, but in her, without the armor. Every morning, before beginning work, he said her name in prayer. And then, "I am coming home to God, Maria. I am coming where you are." He died in 1987 at the age of 74. Giovanna outlived him by 9 years. Rinaldo, who became an engineer and had 3 children of his own, kept the factory going until 2001. He was, by every account of those who worked under him, the kind of employer who paid on time, remembered names, and was present, specifically deliberately present, for every difficult moment that his work required him to face, however helpless it made him feel. The locked room, once opened, does not lock again, and what passes out of it passes also into the next generation, the way everything passes, for better and for worse, always in both directions, through the ones we love. Let me tell you what I believe this story means, and then I need to ask you something directly. I believe the most important sentence in Cesare Martinelli's story is not the one about choosing work over his daughter. That sentence is tragic, and it is real, and it cost what it cost. But the most important sentence is the one Padre Pio said at the beginning: "Your daughter did not die alone." Not because it resolves the tragedy. Nothing resolves it. A child died calling her father's name, and her father was not there. That is true, and it remains true, and no amount of subsequent faithfulness can make it not have happened. But Padre Pio did not say, "It is fine, it does not matter, your daughter is happy in heaven and has forgotten." He said, "She did not die alone." And what he meant was that the absence of her father did not define her death. That God was there, that the grace of the sacraments was there, that a little girl who had been baptized and had received her first communion and had been taught to pray did not spend her last hours outside the reach of divine love simply because the man who should have been at her bedside was on a bus to Bari. God fills what we leave empty, not always, not everywhere. The theology is complicated, and I am not pretending otherwise. But in a hospital room in Foggia in March of 1957, a 9-year-old girl died in the presence of her mother and her God. And the absence of her father did not leave her abandoned. It left her father alone in a hotel lobby in Bari, reading a telegram, sitting in a chair with the particular stillness of a man who has just understood what he has done. And even then, God did not leave him. He brought him eventually to a friary in San Giovanni Rotondo, and to a friar who had seen the moment and who was waiting to tell him what his daughter wanted him to know: come home to God. I'm waiting there for you, not with accusation, not with grief, not with the reproach that you deserve, but with the love that is larger than what you deserve. Because that is the love that God gives to children and that children give to the parents who failed them. and it is the most accurate image of divine mercy that exists in the created world. As long as there is life, there is a path home. That is the promise Padre Pio made to every soul he encountered who had spent years or decades running from a locked room. The room can be opened. The armor can fall. The thing you have been carrying since you were 8 years old can be given to God. And when you give it to God, you will find, as Cesare found, as every person who has done this has found, that the act of giving it does not leave you empty. It leaves you open. And open is the condition in which grace operates. You just received something that Padre Pio spent 3 hours in a confessional giving to one man in 1957. The revelation of what helplessness costs a soul. The specific hidden connection between an old wound and a recent failure, and the path back from both. This channel exists to carry these testimonies to the people who need them most, to the man who is working 14 hours a day and knows, somewhere beneath the schedule, what he is running from, to the woman whose home is perfectly managed, but whose presence within it has been slowly hollowing out, to the person reading this who recognized, at some point in the last few minutes, that there is a locked room in their soul too, and a name for what is locked inside it. If this reached you at the right moment, the super thanks button below is one way to say, keep going, keep finding these testimonies, keep bringing them to the people who are still on the bus to Bari, still convinced that the responsible thing is the only thing, still one telegram away from understanding what the responsible thing actually cost. These truths do not reach people by accident. They reach people because someone kept the channel running. Be that person. And now I need to ask you something directly before you close this video. Is there a room in your soul that has been locked since you were very young? Is there a moment in your history when the world removed something it should not have been able to remove, and you concluded, not in words, but in a decision that shaped everything afterward, that control was the only protection available? Is there a version of the factory in your life? A domain where you are fully competent, fully in command, fully insulated from the thing you have been running from since childhood? You do not have to answer that question publicly, but I am asking you to sit with it in the presence of God rather than in the presence of your schedule, to let the question stay open long enough for an honest answer to arrive. Because Padre Pio's answer to Cesare Martinelli was not condemnation. It was not even primarily about the choice he had made. It was about what was under the choice, the root, the 8-year-old boy, the locked room, and the news, the genuinely good news, the news that deserves the word gospel, that the room can be opened, and that what is waiting inside it is not just the wound but God himself, who has been standing inside that locked room with the wound since the day you locked the door. He did not leave when you locked it. He does not condemn you for locking it. He is simply there, waiting, saying in the quiet way that he says the most important things, I have been here the whole time. Open the door. Come home. As long as there is life, there is a path back to that room. And once you go into it and find God there, you will find also, in the particular way that God arranges these meetings, the 9-year-old girl who asked her father to come back soon, and who never stopped believing that he would. Write coming home in the comments below if this video reached you in a moment when you recognize something, a locked room, a name for what is inside it, a version of the factory, or simply the recognition that there is something you have been running from and that you are tired of running. Padre Pio told Cesare, the day you stop running is the day your daughter gets to welcome you, not at the end of your life. Every morning when you say her name, she is there, and every morning you come a little closer to where she is. Write it below. Let it be the first step.